While the handout's coming around, I want to do something. This isn't to put you on the spot, but I kind of want to make a little bit of an imprint in the message this morning. Ryan, would you and your brother come up? Come on up here for just a minute. Yeah. And Dylan, and you guys come up here too. I'll get out of the way. You guys just stand there. The sermon's only going to be about a half hour long, so that's all you have to stand up here for. Now, I want you to imagine, we're taking a little break from the four-letter words this morning. We're going to be looking at Daniel. And you guys look at them. So, and I want you to imagine this scenario. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were just young boys. And I want these boys to imagine this. They were taken from their country. More than likely, their parents, their mother and father, were killed. Their grandparents, more likely, were killed. Their friends, their relations, unless they was about their age and in the same predicament, they were killed. And in the midst of losing their home, losing their family, they were taken into a foreign country. And because they was from good stock, King Nebuchadnezzar, or Nezer, however you like to say it, decided he would take these boys and try to make something out of them to benefit the kingdom. Now it would be like, if we can imagine today's scenario, it'd be like these young men losing their country of the United States of America, their parents, their relatives all killed, and taken over to North Korea or China and taught in their ways, and was expected to just erase all of their heritage that they might be implemented into that culture. Now, this is what happened. Just young boys like this. Now, you guys can sit down. I just wanted for you to get a visual that you can take your seats. You want to stay up here, I think. But it kind of brings a visual when you look at it like that. These are just kids. Now, they're on their way to become young men, but really, to me, they're just kids. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were just young boys when this scenario happened. And I just wanted for you to keep that in mind as we go through this morning. And the title of the message today is God Will Enable You. Sometimes we go through things and we think there is just no way I'm going to get through this. There's no way I'm going to survive this. But yet God has a plan and He will enable us. It's amazing that Daniel, he was kind of the spokesperson of the group. But as young kids, it's amazing that they began to realize that their hope was in God. How did this get ingrained in them? Well, I believe that from a very young age, they was told the stories that's recorded in the Old Testament. They were told how God was a deliverer and that they had to trust in God. And there were certain things that they couldn't do. And they held on to these, as you'll see as we come through this morning. I believe that God is able to enable us through whatever we face going forward. Now, in our Bible study, we're going to be looking at some prophecy. And the prophecy going forward, it doesn't look good for mankind. It's going to call on the church to stand up and to be ready and to not compromise. So this morning, I want to encourage you to dare to be a Daniel. And I think Daniel is one of the greatest examples in the Bible of a man who stood for God regardless of the circumstances that came his way. Whatever the world threw at him, he He stuck with God. He trusted on His power to see him through. He couldn't trust on his parents anymore. He couldn't trust on his people. He couldn't trust on his country. He had to trust in God. But I'm made to believe that he was trusting in God way before all these circumstances took place. Before it ever happened, I believe he was resolved. We're going to face trials and we're going to face temptations in life, especially, Sister Donna, in our culture that we're living in today. And everybody sees it. Doug and I was talking to a Mennonite man yesterday, and he said what we've all said. He said, I think that our country is more divided now than it's ever been. We all see that. So we need to prepare ourselves for battle. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had just defeated Jerusalem in battle. And this is what the Word says about it. We're going to be doing quite a bit of reading this morning out of the book of Daniel. Then the king commanded Ashpenaz, his chief of eunuchs, to bring some of the people of Israel, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish, of good appearance and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. The king assigned them a daily portion of the food that the king ate, and of the wine that he drank. They were to be educated for 3 years, and at the end of that time they were to stand before the king. Among these were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah of the tribe of Judah. And the chief of the eunuchs gave them names. Daniel he called Belshazzar, Hananiah he called Shadrach, Mishael he called Meshach, and Azariah he called Abednego. Now, as we look at the tactics of Nebuchadnezzar, we're going to notice they are very similar to the schemes that's used by the secular institutions of our culture today. And we're going to come through a few of those. The first one we want to look at is isolation. The first thing that this culture, this king, this government does is to separate these young men. See, when we're in a group we are unfamiliar with, especially one that holds different values than we do, it's so much easier to compromise our beliefs. And there's all kinds of reasons for that. We remember what peer pressure was like coming up through school, grade school, junior high, high school. Remember what peer pressure was like on our first job if he's in the service. It really doesn't get away from us. There's always that peer pressure. Nebuchadnezzar knew that the chances of changing these young men's hearts would be much greater if he could take them away from everyone and everything they knew. So he used the tactic of isolation. And then he used what we might call indoctrination. Youths without blemish, of good appearance, and skillful in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace, and to teach them the literature and the language of the Chaldeans. The king had no interest in Jehovah. He had no interest in the religion of these folks that came from Jerusalem. Had no interest at all. These young men would be taught in the ways of Babylon rather in the ways of God. The encouragement this morning is for our young men that stood up here. Are you being taught in the ways of God? More so than being taught in the ways of our culture. More so than being taught in the ways of the world. And for the young children, are we as parents and grandparents concerned about teaching them in the ways of God? To counter the culture that we're living in today. This culture is just like King Nebuchadnezzar. It has no interest in seeing our young people taught about the things of God. They could care less. Matter of fact, there's a lot of evil teaching going on. There's a lot of indoctrination going on. Nebuchadnezzar's mindset and our culture's mindset is that they would learn a different language and they would read different literature than what they had ever been exposed to before. There is another scheme to wean them away from their heritage. We do not live in a culture that presents the things of God like we was accustomed to when someone my age was growing up. It's amazing the amount of literature that you can check out at the public library, and you don't have to be 18 to check it out. You can be a child and go there and check out terrible literature that runs counter to that which is moral, which is right, which is good. And it didn't happen overnight. Little by little, these things have encroached upon our society and upon our culture. And part of me can actually say shame on the church for allowing it to happen. Third point we want to look at is compromise. The king gave them food and wine, which had been forbidden them prior to their capture. Israel had been given a very strict dietary code. They was careful what they ate. They was careful what they drank and how much of it they drank. Well, Daniel refused to compromise his convictions, regardless of the cost. I think convictions are valuable assets. And how much do they mean to you? How much are you willing to defend your convictions? So Daniel was not about to compromise. Another tactic that King Nebuchadnezzar used, and the culture we live in today also, is confusion. I can't even imagine some of the things that young people are exposed to today. When I was a kid growing up, there was a girl in our 6th grade class. Her name was Star Duncan. And she was what we called back then a tomboy. And every one of us boys in that class, she beat us in hand wrestling. Every one of us, she beat us. She grew up. Tomboy went away, married, has children. But wonder what would have been presented to her in today's culture. Folks are unsure, they're puzzled, they're confused, they're lost, they're baffled, they're unclear. And it's not just children. People talk as if they fell and bumped their head on things. And I'm not afraid to say some of the stuff they come up with is, well, how can you say it nicely? Stupid. It makes no sense. It's counterintuitive to everything that we know is right. The king took away their identity by changing their names to pagan ones. He changed Daniel's name to Belteshazzar, which can have several possible meanings, and none of them are good. Can you imagine having your name changed to a name that would be offensive to God? Taking away these young men's given names and changing them were designed to confuse their identity and to allow for a quick assimilation into the Babylonian culture. Those that are Christians, or what we might call evangelicals, are being attacked in the same way. Same shape and form. And I'm telling you, you better be prepared for battle. You better be prepared for battle from folks in your own family, from your own neighbors. There's a lot of confusion out there. People don't know who they are. Do you know who you are? Do you know who you are? I mean, right down to the very core of your identity. Do you know who you are? Second thing we want to look at to be able to stick with your convictions. The time to make up your mind that you will avoid compromise is before the battle takes place, not afterwards. Sometimes I've often said, you need to practice when you get a question or somebody gives you a statement or somebody gives you a conviction that's just plain moronic. How do you respond to them? How do you respond to them skillfully in a way that can convince the gainsayers that they're wrong and there is a better way? Let me take you to Calvary. Let me take you to the cross. Let me take you back to the Garden of Eden, show you where all this stuff began. I'm convinced that we have a book that can be skillfully used, and we can maneuver people that are confused into a strong identity with Jesus Christ. I believe that's possible. Daniel was ready for the attack and decided that he would stick by his convictions. In today's culture, we have to have the faith to stick with godly convictions, no matter what. And there is tremendous amount of pressure out there. And it doesn't really matter. As a pastor, there's pressure out there from other pastors because we're not tolerant. We're hateful. We're bigoted. We're homophobic. And these are other pastors that tries to shame pastors that have a conviction based on the Word of God into kneeling down to their false gods of culture, to being politically correct. Now, I want to be biblically correct, and I hope you do too. Continuing reading in the book of Daniel, but Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. Therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. Now, this is a boy. This is a young boy. And he's speaking up after seeing his family killed, knowing that he could be killed for such insubordination, but he spoke up. And God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. Now, there's a big lesson right there, and we're not going to get off on this, but there is a lesson on how to respond to evil, how to respond to your convictions being compromised. It didn't say Daniel demanded. It didn't say Daniel made all kinds of fussing and going on. It simply said, therefore, he asked the chief of the eunuchs to allow him not to defile himself. And it says God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And the chief of the eunuchs said to Daniel, He said, I fear my lord the king. In other words, he was fearing Nebuchadnezzar, who assigned your food and your drink. For why should he see that you were in worse condition than the youths who are of your own age? So you would endanger my head with the king. Then Daniel said to the steward, whom the chief of the eunuchs had assigned over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, test your servants for 10 days. Didn't get into no big argument with him. He said, test your servants for 10 days. Even called himself a servant. A lot to be learned there, how Daniel spoke and conversed with the culture that he found himself in the midst of. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you. And deal with your servants according to what you see. This is the ultimate trust in God. He said, you deal with us with what you see. So he listened to them in this manner and tested them for 10 days. He probably thought, well, what could 10 days hurt? At the end of the 10 days, it was seen that they were better in appearance and fatter in flesh than all the youths who ate from the king's table. So the steward took away their food and the wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables. As for these 4 youths, God gave them learning. God gave them skill in all literature and wisdom. And Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. It says God gave them. Now Daniel, he models 4 character traits for you and I when we find ourselves under pressure and we find ourselves under temptation. A temptation is something that lures you away into conduct that you know you ought not be doing. And you know the end result isn't good because perhaps you've been deceived before. I always think of the Beauty and the Beast and the broom talking to the candlestick. And he answers the candlestick and he says, I've been burnt by you before. I've been burnt by you before. So we know that there's some things that will lead us into a direction and the end result is not good. So Daniel, he gives us these 4 character traits that we can utilize. One is decisiveness. The text tells us that Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself. It'd be sort of like this man resolved. My father, when he got saved, he resolved because he was real close to being an alcoholic. But he resolved that he would never drink again. And to my knowledge, he never did. I know folks that have resolved that they will never, ever use drugs again. They've resolved that. They've decided that. That's not an option for them. Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself. If we're going to be successful in our spiritual walk, and if we're going to be able to tap into the power of God, we need to be ready to say no to temptation and compromise before it ever takes place. It's not a matter if temptation will come. It's when temptation comes. Are you able to resolve that I'm not going there? I'm going to stand firm in my convictions of the Word. I'm going to stand firm in my conviction to my mind and my heart, to my family. I'm not going there. Decide right here and now that you will never, ever compromise the things of God. All it takes is just a little bit of thinking about it. And you think on it long enough, and you'll find yourself with a McDonald's cheeseburger. That's what will happen. Most of you know what I'm talking about. Somebody said, what in the world are you talking about? When I get thinking about a McDonald's cheeseburger, I don't eat them all the time, but when I start thinking about them, the onions, the pickle, and the ketchup, and the mustard, it's like, I've got to get one. I've got to get a McDonald's cheeseburger. And I usually regret it after I eat it. But it doesn't stop me from getting it. Decide right now that you're not going to compromise the things of God. Not only did Daniel model decisiveness, but he also modeled boldness. Daniel was so confident that following God's way is the best way that he laid down a challenge. I'm just amazed at how these boys conducted themselves. His challenge was, test your servants for 10 days. Let us be given vegetables to eat and water to drink. Now, he knew that if the diet of vegetables and water did not allow him and his friends to appear healthy, it could mean his death. And the captain eunuch said it would mean his death for sure. But he believed in the power of God so much that he was willing to make this bold challenge. And the eunuch, who knew nothing about these boys as God, knew nothing about their convictions of how they lived their lives, he was impressed by something in Daniel that he put his life on the line also. Are we willing to say that behavior is not becoming to a Christian, so I will not engage in it, nor will I consent, no matter what the consequences? That is the type of boldness that is going to take if we expect God to work mightily in our lives and also in our community of northern Richland County. See, most of us, there's not a whole lot we can do about Morrow County. There's not a whole lot we can do about Indiana or California. But I believe there's something we can do about Richland County, and even the focus more so where most of us lives here in northern Richland County. I believe this is our world that we've been placed in this generation to make an impact, to make a difference. One family at a time, one person at a time, back and forth communication, love, hug, let folks know you appreciate them. This is the world that God has placed us in. Not only did he have a decisiveness and a boldness that we can use when we're tempted, but he also had an expectation. He said, then let our appearance and the appearance of the youths who eat the king's food be observed by you. And deal with your servants according to what you see. Now, we had these 4 young men up here representing youth. And we also know that there was a lot more youths there. And they probably had some peer pressure going on amongst themselves. But he said, you look at our appearance and these other youths, you look at them. Daniel had an expectation that the ways of God were superior to the ways of that culture. Was superior to the ways of Nebuchadnezzar, was superior to the king's table. He had an expectation. Do you have an expectation that God is able to deliver you? Do you have an expectation that the best days of your marriage are yet in front of you? Do you have an expectation that in spite of the faults, in spite of the missteps, do you have an expectation that the ways of God is going to make the sun shine brighter than it ever has ever before in your life? Regardless of where you're at? Regardless of what your parents have done or did not do? Or they did do? Do you have an expectation that takes you beyond that? I hope you have an expectation. I talk with, we call it counseling or mentoring, however you want to describe it, with several young folks down through the years and continue to do that. And I'd love to sit across the table with a young person. But there are some that I have an expectation for. And I encourage them to get into the Word, to write it inside your mind and your heart. You can have an expectation to make a difference and make an impact in the world that we live today. Daniel was just a kid, but he had an expectation. Somewhere along the line, Daniel had learned that he could trust God. He fully expects God to see him and his friends through all of this. If only we could learn to trust God in the same way. I can only imagine what we could accomplish for the kingdom if we could learn to trust God. And we get talking sometimes in our one-on-ones, and we thought, oh my goodness, if this one wins the election, we're done for, we're doomed, we're toast. Do you have an expectation? Regardless of the circumstances of life, do you have an expectation that God is going to deliver? Daniel also was able to trust in God's power. Another character trait that he had decisiveness, he had boldness, he had expectation, and he could trust in God's power. Augustine, he lived not long after the crucifixion of Christ. He said this, he said, God judged it better to bring good out of evil than not to permit any evil to exist. And I contemplated that when I added this to the message. I thought, well, God could have created a world where there was no evil. But Augustine said that he judged it better to bring good out of evil than not to permit any evil to exist. And what that points to, in my opinion, is that God realized the sacredness of choosing good, rejecting evil from a free moral position, a free choice. We decide. We decide that we're going to choose to love God. Now, God's grace, God's Spirit will empower us and encourage us and gift us to do the things that's pleasing unto God when we make those decisions. But they're decisions that we make. All along in my life, I've seen myself with decisions. I've seen my children with decisions. And I've made some wise ones. And I know it's going to be hard for you to believe. I've made some that was really knuckleheaded. Knuckleheaded decisions that didn't work out very well. There is evil in this world. And you and I will be confronted with it. I'd be safe to say you're going to be confronted with evil before you get out of here today. You'll be confronted with evil before you pull your head tonight. You might say, well, I'm Love the Lord, all you His saints. The Lord preserves the faithful. These young men are not freed from captivity. And they're not free of the king's reign. Matter of fact, from that day on to the day they died, they really were slaves in this kingdom. But as they grew and things changed, in a culture of evil, things can go, for those that's serving God, can take a terrible turn, even though you may be doing a lot of good. I think of Samaritan's Purse when COVID was hit, and you've seen the right and left, back and forth, and William Grant, he took his tent, his medical people, all up to New York, and they ran him out of the place. He was there trying to do good. Wasn't going to cost him anything. But there is an evil that wants to topple the church, that wants to topple Christianity. Daniel was doing great. The 3 Hebrew children were doing great. They were now men. They were running the country. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they got stuck in a situation where they was told if you don't bow down when the music plays, you're going to go into a fiery furnace. The music played, everybody bowed down, but there they stood, just like a big old sore thumb. They went before the king. The king didn't want to kill them. They went for the king, and they said, King, you can play the music all you want. We're not careful to answer you with this. We're not going to bow down to that graven image. Our God, whom we serve, will deliver us. He will deliver us one way or the other out of your hand. The king, he was so mad at their belligerence. He commanded the furnace to be heated up many times hotter than it was supposed to be heated. So hot that the men that threw them in got slain by the heat. The king, however he'd seen this from a distance, he looked in. He said, I thought we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire. He said, lo, I see 4 men unbound, unhurt, down there walking around. And he said, the 4th one is likened unto the Son of Man. Daniel, he got caught up into the evil of the Babylonian Empire. And they said, no, they put this trick out there for him, this trap. He said, if any man prays to any other god besides you, O king, let him be fed to the lions. And the king said, well, I like that. So he signed it. The very next moment they had an opportunity. Daniel knew they signed it. Daniel knew it was there. But he threw open the windows toward Jerusalem like he did every day. And he prayed morning, noon, and night. They went to the king, told him about Daniel, and he went through the night trying to figure out a way to save Daniel, but he could not because he put his insignia on it. It had to happen. So Daniel was thrown into the lion's den. Next day, king went to the mouth. He said, oh, Daniel, that God you serve, was he able to deliver you? And out of the mist, the bowels of the cave, came a voice. And Daniel said, O king, live forever. My God has delivered me out of the mouth of the lion. The king was just beside himself. As much as he was excited for his friend Daniel, he was angered at the presidents who entrapped him. He said, I want all of those men and their wives and their children brought and thrown into the lion's den. The Bible says the lions leaped upon them and they had a smorgasbord. I want to be faithful to God. I want to be able to have an expectation that God is able to deliver. They were not freed from captivity. They were not freed of the king's reign. They still had battles to face, battles to fight. But because of the Lord's blessing, they have been given the exact giftedness that the king had been looking for. And they were given places of honor. God provides for those who are faithful. He may not get us out of every mess that we find ourselves in. But in spite of the mess, He will bless us. I believe that. Our faith today prepares us for promotion tomorrow. The faith of Daniel granted him to rise to the top in Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. The way we trust God today will have significant results going forward. Whether we see it right now or not is beside the point. Start believing today for tomorrow's miracle. You're not held back by circumstances of life. You're not held back by different people's decisions. You're not held back by what your dad does or does not do. You're not held back by a companion. The only one that can hold you back is your lack of trust in God's ability to deliver you. F.B. Myers said this: we ought to be Christians in large, bold type, so that it would not be necessary for others to belong in our society or company, or to regard us through spectacles in order to detect our true discipleship. The message of our lives should resemble the big advertisements which can be read on billboards by all who pass by. I think that Mr. Myers was thinking of people like Daniel. I mean, they were like walking billboards from the time they were kids until the time they died. They were people of faith. They were willing to obtain God's power by living the life of faith that God has prescribed. Now the challenge is this morning, are you living a life of faith? Are you living a life of faith that God has prescribed? A lot of times in the counseling ministry we talk about prescriptions. The commandments of God is, the word command is where we get our word prescription. You go to the doctor, he gives you a command. He gives the pharmacist a command. So God is giving us a prescription, and if we live our life by faith and we take those prescribed directives from God, you're going to do well. You're going to do good. You're going to thrive. You're going to be blessed. So, are you a walking billboard for your Christian faith? When push comes to shove, are you going to stand up for Christ no matter what? If you haven't taken that mindset, you have no idea what you're missing out on. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil. Why? Because I know you are with me. I know you are with me. I expect to be delivered. I have my shield of faith. It's able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked one. Are you a walking billboard for your Christian faith? So today I want to encourage you to dare to be a Daniel and place it all. Place every bit of it in God's hands. Trust in Him. Your faith going forward is going to be tested. How would we respond if we was ripped away from our home, our country was destroyed, and we were slaves in an atheistic country? Dare to be a Daniel. Place it all in the hands of God. We're going to ask you to stand. I ask you to bow your heads. Take a few moments this morning and just talk with God about where you're at in your relationship with Him, as well as your ability to stand firm in biblical convictions. Are you that godly father? Are you that godly wife, that godly husband? Are you that brother or sister in Christ that can be counted on? Are you able to resist the push and the shove of the culture? Can you live with a high expectation that God is going to deliver you?